Today in the EU, everything that changed on election night.
We won the European elections, my friend.
We're seeing the push towards the extreme right that we had feared.
I am really sick of the left always trying to show that they are the best, regardless of what people think.
As we are close to all those who want to dismantle Europe, be it ECR or ID.
More than 360 million European citizens could vote to form the upcoming European Parliament this weekend. Across Europe, the overall turnout was around 51%, and the results had effects on individual countries. Who were the big winners according to the latest exit polls? Who were the losers? What happens with the non-affiliated? And for which EU countries were these elections a make or break situation? Hello and welcome. I am Evikiori, and this is Today in the EU. To talk about what happened during the election night, we're joined by Aurelie Pugnet, Euractiv's politics editor. Hi, Aurelie.
Hi, Evie.
Welcome back.
Thank you for having me again.
So, we've been prepping for this election marathon for the past months, and now the time has come. We're recording the election night at the European Parliament. So, what's the overall sentiment we're picking up from these elections?
The overall sentiment really in the room when I announced the first results of what the future European Parliament will look like and who will be the future 720 members of Parliament was really expected in a way. It was, there is a far right surge and the whole Parliament is really veering towards the right. And in a way, it was a trend that was expected. So everything was right and everything that was expected is confirmed.
The whispers are true.
Exactly.
And we know that the result will be determined in the following days, but we have now an estimate. Who are the biggest losers and winners according to the latest exit polls?
As I just said, the biggest winners are definitely the right-wing parties, especially the major party that is the EPP, so the centre-right, the European People's Party. They come out of the elections with the largest amount of seats.
My message is European citizens opted and voted for a centre-right Europe, and that is what we will deliver afterwards. And the second point is now, after this democratic outcome, I invite now socialists and liberals to be clear in respecting the outcome of elections. That means that I expect that they are supporting Ursula von der Leyen as Commission President in Parliament and also on the Commission side.
Said Manfred Weber on election night, focusing on Europeans opting for a centre-right Europe.
What is interesting to see is that the centre holds, is what we say. That means that the centre-right, the socialists and the liberals, which are the three parties in the middle of the hemicycle, do keep the majority of the seats. That said, it doesn't mean that necessarily the winners, the socialists and the liberals, because the liberals actually lost a lot of the seats. So did the Greens as well.
Which is good news for us. So in that sense, clearly not happy with the total number of seats, but happy with the different results, which also reflects a better representation of the Green movement throughout Europe.
Commented Bas Eickhout from the Greens.
Contrary to the far-right parties, like I just said, they actually gained quite a lot.
Which was expected.
Which was expected, absolutely.
So it was indeed a crazy night last night. It was a make it or break it election for many, and much was happening after the very first numbers were published. What were the most surprising consequences coming from each country?
The most surprising consequence was definitely, I think, for a lot of people in the room, Emmanuel Macron the French president, calling for snap elections.
J'ai décidé de vous redonner le choix de notre avenir parlementaire par le vote.
I decided to return the choice of our parliamentary future to you. This evening, I dissolved the National Assembly, announced last night Emmanuel Macron.
He dissolved the Assembly, the National Assembly, which is the parliament, just a few minutes after the first results came in as to how the French voted. And in France, the first party that got the most votes is the Rassemblement National, which is the far-right party in France, the most important one, followed later on by Macron's party. And that is seen as a big defeat, of course, for the French president. And so he called for elections that would be happening in just 3 weeks. So that was definitely a surprise. That was definitely one of the biggest consequences of tonight. A second biggest consequence that we saw was also in Germany, which is the second big country in the EU that proposes a lot of the laws and obviously is a deal maker or deal breaker, where again, the government in power, the coalition in power, led by Chancellor Olaf Scholz, is again also weakened because we saw again the huge rise of AfD, which is again the far-right party. We saw that the number one party actually winning the most votes is the center-right, so Angela Merkel's party, the former chancellor, so the CDU-CSU. And then that is followed later on by Scholz, Socialist Party, that comes in only later on. So for both major governments of Europe actually trying to push EU further and things like that, being weakened like this is a huge signal to how they do politics.
Now, on France, what does the next day hold for domestic politics?
The French are expected to come to cast their ballots again in just a couple of weeks on the 30th of June.
Very soon.
That is very soon indeed. What is expected is, for a lot of people, basically a remake of what just happened today and what just happened at the EU election.
Le Rassemblement National, par la voix de Jordan Bardella.
Rassemblement National, represented by Bardella, achieved double the numbers of the presidential majority's candidate. So we are facing a democratic crisis and a crisis of representation, said Nicolas Maisonnet from Rassemblement National.
There is this idea that the European election is the place for people to vote where their heart really belongs and maybe not how they would vote on a national election. But this time, when you see that the far right comes in first and that there's a huge disapproval and it's a signal to the president that they don't trust his politics anymore, that could be replicated at a national level. And we could see Marine Le Pen or Jordan Bardella coming in as prime minister and then, who knows, maybe later on as president. And therefore, France could be led by a far-right government, which would be a first since the Second World War.
And speaking of the far-right, we talked a lot about the rise of the far-right, and there is a lot of uncertainty about the role of ECR. Why are all eyes on ECR tonight?
The Conservatives really hold a special place in Parliament at the moment because they are led by a very big delegation of Italians, which are under the leadership, if you will, of the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. What is interesting is that people are looking towards her to see where she will position herself in the next parliament and whether she will support von der Leyen, who's the head of commission and running again as candidate to be re-elected, or if she will create another group and actually lead really more conservative politics and far-right policies as well. So all eyes are on them because they could be the make it or break it of von der Leyen re-election and really give the EU a new direction when it comes to policies and really put the target towards the right rather than the center, how it's been for the past few years and decades, actually.
On coalitions, what were the signals that we saw tonight?
We were just talking about ECR and so the Conservatives and how they could have a huge impact on the next election of the president of the commission and also on making policies and laws basically in the next term.
To be honest, I wish personally for a center-right coalition in this parliament. So probably working with people who really have serious policy, center-right policy that can be implemented. I think that's what we need in Brussels. Fidesz is not candidate to join the group. They didn't ask us yet. When they do, we'll follow the procedure and stick to our values.
Assita Kanko said about plausible ECR coalitions.
But what is interesting is that von der Leyen, so who's poised to be the next Commission president and propose those laws, even though she left the door open to making alliances with those people, with the far right, the Conservatives and things like this, tonight, just a few minutes ago, when she came to the stage and talked after we saw the first projection, she said, well, I will first look towards the Liberals and the Socialists, which are her traditional partners, to make a coalition and make agreements and make an alliance, rather than actually going again in the direction that she's been going to and saying, oh, I might actually open the door to more conservative and far-right parties, which is what she's been saying until now. So it's not exactly sure where this informal alliance in the parliament will actually be situated. What is going to be interesting to look at is how the parties that we call non-affiliated, how they behave. There are a few of them, actually. There are more than 50 MEPs to be elected in the next term, so in this term coming up. That is a huge amount. And they include, for example, Fidesz, which is the party of the Hungarian prime minister. They also include German new party, which is Sarah Wagenknecht, which left the left party, so the extreme left party. And we don't know where they're going to go. And so they could actually have a huge influence on coalition making.
So how much influence can they have on coalition making and also king making?
So they could actually have a lot of influence on coalition making and king making or queen making if it's von der Leyen who gets reappointed by the leaders next week. What is going to be interesting is to see if they manage to reshuffle the parliament as it stands now, because the results that we've gotten today and we're going to get in the coming days are based on how the parliament looks at the moment, but it does not take into account how each little party is going to be trying to create coalitions in the background. We don't know this yet. And so it will be hugely influenced by how many seats those non-affiliated people get, actually.
Mm-hmm. We shall see.
We shall see.
Thank you very much, Aurelie.
Thank you very much for having me.
I am Evi Chiori, and this was Euractiv's Today in the EU podcast. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news, sign up for our podcast newsletter, and if you haven't subscribed yet, you can find us on all streaming platforms. Remember to leave a review or a comment on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help us a lot to spread the word about our work. This episode was produced by Jada Santana, Miriam Saenz de Tejada, Nicoleta Yonta, and myself. Thank you for tuning in, and we will be back tomorrow morning. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.